Hi there, welcome to another chess24 Banter Blitz. Okay, and before we get into the Banter Blitz, I'll just like to emphasize the voucher code 15% off. You can go premium and get 15% off with the voucher code Kingscrusher if you go to chess24.com/premium. So you can get to play the likes of Magnus Carlsen, the current world champion, Grandmasters, IMs, and even bunnies like me on Sunday. And there's a whole load of other perks as well. So really, it's unbeatable. You know, check this out: chess24.com/premium, voucher code. Okay, let's get to the challenges now. Okay, the challenges. Dangerous ride today. Tell me if audio and visuals okay. I hope it is on the chat. Okay, knight c6. Right, I think I'll play d5 here. My queens can't be subject of tempo gain immediately. And let's see. It's a bit like, what is it a bit like? I'm hoping it's a bit passive for white here. This early d5 thrust. I'm not usually doing that kind of thing. Okay. Maybe bishop g4. Can I castle queenside? Is this too cheeky to castle queenside? If I castle queenside? Interesting position. E4. I don't know if E4 is that too much. E takes. Why don't I just give the isolated queen's pawn, which actually I've been studying isolated queen pawn examples this morning. Isolated queen pawn. Here I'm hoping with bishop d6 I can justify giving c3 as a tempo gaining option, because I want to play bishop d6 and queen h5. I know it's very aggressive. Bishop d6, queen h5. If knight takes d4 is played, then that's slightly different. That's slightly different. Yeah. Okay. So c takes bishop d6, knight c3, queen h5, and I'll be threatening bishop takes f3 if h3, bishop takes h3. If knight e5 there, bishop g4. If bishop g4, that's check. Got to be wary that's check. I can't just make on h2. Yeah, my king's on c8. That sometimes affects the variations here. So let's see. Knight c3, queen h5. Okay, I'll do that here. Or not. I think here is okay, actually. For h3, bishop h3. That should be okay there. As far as I can tell, that should be okay. Or not. Okay. So f5 is interesting. Yeah, f5 is sort of interesting if I want the option of f4 later. Okay. So knight f6, this is pretty aggressive stuff. It does also support my bishop. So in other words, d5, knight e5. Oh, that's interesting. If knight takes, bishop takes e2. And if, you know, there's no time for bishop a7, knight f3. So maybe d5, knight e5. But as an aside, you know, f4 is interesting to fragment. Knight f6, maybe rook a, just get the rooks into the center. Okay. So what's happening here is f4 is actually, is that something to think about? F4, it might be in conjunction with, oh, okay, well maybe f4 here, just fragmenting these pawns. So if takes, I'm threatening mate and the knight. So the pawn's getting fragmented. All right, there's a form pawn option here, f3. The literature's... he just takes that off. Alright, so maybe I do want a form pawn structure, what I call a form pawn structure, which is hardly documented by anyone in the history of chess. So I'm hoping to do something about that at some point. Form pawn structures. Yeah, so here's a form pawn structure which offers great winning chances. So, as proven by many neural networks recently. And there is a pressure on G2, form pawn structure transition. So, okay, Queen H3, nope, because then there's bishop takes. I have to hold the form pawn in place, hoping the bishop will go back, and then Queen H3. I think white is going to be formed here with the form pawn. Form pawn alert. So these structures, by the way, I think I've been reviewing pawn structures in the last few days, and I realized something quite, I think, interesting about them. In that the documentation is, I don't know if documentation is really there at the moment. Okay, for pawn structures. Okay, so dangerous ride. Okay, thanks. That was interesting. I mean, the form pawn is an example of an under-documented pawn structure. You could say, well, it's an element. It's not a pawn chain. I would argue it is. All those pawn structures with a form pawn, you could say, is a form pawn related pawn structure. It has that feature, the form pawn. I think they're pretty dangerous anyway. Okay, so let's see, Zevich. I mean, I'll give you an example of what I was thinking about during the week, actually. So when I was investigating isolated queen's pawns, so Soltis did 17 characterizations of different pawn structures, and included as 2 of those isolated king pawn, basically, and isolated queen pawn situations. Essentially, I mean, there's loads of there might be other ways of getting an isolated pawn in the center. Okay, so he distinguished between the 2, but generally, okay, let's play d3 here. What's wrong with d3? I think it's nice to take the element out. Just say, look, here are isolated pawn structures, rather than tying it down to a particular configuration. So if you just took the element out, in fact, any pawn structure term is in a way you're studying a whole array, potentially, of structures. Like, you know, gambit structures, I think, should need to be taken seriously. Like, for example, the Smith-Morrow gambit offers semi-open D file for white. The Benko gambit offers, you know, semi-open B file for black. So, you know, gambit structures are underrepresented. I'm just getting the idea that the whole area of pawn structures has been largely underrepresented. But, you know, maybe yeah, I just find that interesting. It's a really interesting thing to consider. I of course, tactics, I think, you know, they dominate chess completely. But it's interesting that you know, pawn structures, we could reason about them more potentially. I think if there was more sort of documentation about them. Okay, I think this weakens the king side in principle, but in practice, am I actually going to exploit these weaknesses or not? Is there going to be something nasty happening? Okay, maybe there's going to be something nasty. What about knight g6? I don't want my king to be checkmated. It would be annoying. The king coming out for a bit. Oh, okay, this looks a bit dubious, doesn't it? I know this looks doubtful. But I can't see anything concrete at the moment. Queen d2, f4. Bishop g6 takes. I can see that this might become favourable for me. on queen d2 f4, but maybe I'm hoping I'm not being completely optimistic. That's a method in the madness here. I am targeting h3. This forcing move bishop g6 is obviously scary. Is my king, is it a bit too weak here? Or can I use the g file soon? This is interesting. If giving up the light square bishop is quite a commitment. Okay, knight e5. That lends spot. I'm immediately threatening knight takes f3. So which king is weaker now? Which king is weaker? If I'm getting to play queen h4, I think white's king could be weaker. On knight takes, there's a threat of knight f3. If f3, queen h4, if queen g2, well, you know, I'm looking forward to this potentially. Aren't I? Isn't that dangerous? Rook g8, queen takes, queen h3. Isn't that mating? So we're talking f3, you know, queen h4, killer common square, queen g2, rook g8, queen takes g8. No, this is nonsense. It's not mating. But it's dangerous. I think I should play it anyway. The bishop would be hanging, but on the other hand, he plays rook g1 threatening queen g7. I still feel I need to play queen h4 here. Okay. The bishop's hanging, but there's rook g1. There's queen f2 check there if I want the queens off. Knight d3, queen f2 en route. So we're talking queen g2, knight takes d3, rook g1. No, queen f2, it's not check, but it pins the queen. So yeah, I've been studying isolated queen's pawn structures this morning. I went over this classic. Okay, hang on. Let me just make sure. Is this knight takes and then queen f2? That really works, doesn't it? I would hope it works anyway. Otherwise, there's an emergency button called queen takes h3 or queen g3, isn't there? A knight e4 I don't think is a killer. Queen g3, I just want the queens off. He was threatening, mate. It's good to take off that attacking piece. That was a killer common square there. My problem with studying pawn structures is I'm a bit worried about diluting my tactical considerations. Because as Nigel Short says, you know, pawn structures is great, but checkmate ends the game. I think if you loosen your tactical considerations... Okay, I think rook g8 is going to be okay, unless there's knight f6. I don't think so. Can I get away with this? I hope I can get away with this. Should I actually work it out? Probably. Hold on a sec. Hold on. Bishop f5 for rook g8. I'm just worried about him taking off both rooks. And then rook h8. But is that just imaginary? I'm not entirely convinced. There is also... No. Well, maybe. King h7. If he takes off both rooks, queen h3 first, then king h7. That pushes the use of g1 out of the equation for the other rook. So let's imagine rook g1, rook g8, queen takes, rook takes, threatening rook h8, queen takes h3. Okay, it's irrelevant. Okay, so can I just play rook g8 here? Or I should take first. I should just take first and then rook g8. There's no major checks. Okay. Now rook g8. Well, now I've got the king to myself. Rook h3. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, my concern is tactical dilution, because if you start having this lens about pawn structures during an actual game, I am concerned about that generally. The dilution, of calculation, dilution of looking for the the tactical lens. Okay, so knight ge2 h3 d3. Anyway, so I was looking at this classic game, of Capablanca beating Lasca in their World Championship match in Havana, Cuba. And I was told by an immense Lasca fan that actually it was really hot weather and Lasca didn't like the temperature. And also I was sort of informed, I'm not sure he's made all this up, but the venue itself was also noisy. I think there is substantiation. The venue was noisy. Not to make excuses, but maybe Lasca wasn't at his best in that match, But Lasca was getting on a bit. But if he wasn't at his best, the problem is this. People use this game as an example of playing against the isolated queen's pawn, as if all you do is swap off pieces and torture the opponent in an endgame where they have zero counterplay. I'm not entirely sure that's a fair representation. Obviously, if you study like isolated queen's pawns, I think it's very important to see the pros and cons for sure. But in showing the pros and cons, the winning with the isolated queen's pawn and the losing with the isolated queen's pawn, I think the actual game examples, also that maybe even the situations the games were played in does become relevant if you're really using them as key reference points for the arguments for or against particular structures. So if there is evidence that this match wasn't played in ideal conditions, it does seem concretely that Lasca had major opportunities earlier in the game. Can I play a3 here? Okay, c takes. So he's going to get that pawn back, and I am in positional trouble here. Even though I've got a form pawn, this isn't entirely... That c-file is a bit dangerous. Oh, okay. I think that might help my cause here. Let's keep the second rank protected. You see, for me, chess has more truth to it than the entire legal system of any country, because in chess, as Lasca said, lies and hypocrisy don't last too long. So if you're going to start giving these examples of theoretical pawn formations, I have this idea that it's good to be entirely objective where possible, and is part of that objectivity saying sometimes the circumstances of games, or actually the technical missed opportunities I could see in that game. And I didn't even mention this variation when I analysed it like many years back. But there's and it has been pointed out by many at certain sites that White didn't need to suffer in a long, torturous endgame, as many of Capablanca's opponents seem to. But on that occasion, if White had given up both bishops, there was actually a small edge to be had for White. So I don't know. I like to treat chess as kind of sacred when checking the game examples. They're more important to me than any legal precedents in the legal system, etc. Chess, we should be dealing with truth. It's a model game. The information is there. So if I give examples of isolated queen's pawns, which I know I'm just making out an advert, I think that's a little unfair. Okay, so queen f2, h5, hg, queen g4, rook f2. This form pawn, is it dangerous or not? Or am I getting slaughtered here on the queen side? Queen g4, queen h4, queen h6. Okay, I'm getting undermined. Very nice. Queen g4, queen h4. There is a form pawn structure here. Form pawn structure. but there is queen h8 all the time. If I insert bishop h6, bishop g7 though, that will make sure this queen f8 is not involved. Bishop h6, bishop g7, the form pawn for the win here. You see, my investigations of Lasker also, I found he had mega high accuracy. Even if you check with modern engines, quite a large number of his games seem to have mega high accuracy. I was astounded. He seems to be one of the more modern players. If you look back at his games, it's very difficult to see him blundering a lot. Okay, thanks, party. Okay, form pawn structure for the win. All right. Magnus is a Kasparov wannabe. Okay. Maybe. I think Kasparov taught Magnus a bit for a little bit. No, I'm not sure. I think Magnus has his own style of play. I don't think he wants to be like Kasparov. And the time that you could be like Kasparov is gone, because the truth is, as I say it, Kasparov leveraged technology like ChessBase. He was one of the pioneers of ChessBase. And that was shown in his simmels, like the Hamburg simmel. He could out-prepare like all of his opponents in advance, and he had a massive crushing score as a result. But that kind of preparation capability was not in the hands of the other grandmasters. If you look at various podcasts, I can hear a lot of people moaning about this, that Kasparov, maybe I shouldn't say too much, but it seems as though Kasparov had quite a lot of resources. But I think, you know, the early ChessBase disparity, to me, he was just immensely more prepared for a lot of games, in my view, in my opinion, with ChessBase. He was an early adopter. So I think Magnus is, in this era, is quite effective, because he's not even relying on technical opening theory, which is kind of, you know, it's inflationary. The value of being a sharp theoretician has gone down because everyone's got access to all this latest stuff. So the style of Magnus's, you know, grinding down style is kind of more in line with the current climate, that everyone's got all this, you know, access to technical information. You can't really get a huge advantage out of the opening as you could do, in my view, in the Kasparov era. Especially if you're an early adopter of certain technologies, for example, ChessBase. Which, okay, so Queen D2, Bishop G5. Can I just keep this bishop hemmed in? If I just allow this bishop, I'm just going to try and keep that bishop. It's not really hemmed in. It's got c6, but that's at a penalty. Can I just, like, double rooks? Yes, so did Vichy on the comments. Yes, Vichy had access as well, early access. Yeah, I mean, I think they were helped. I mean, those that use technology are generally going to be helped. I mean, that's shown in 2001 Space Odyssey. The early monkeys just beating the hell out of the other monkeys using basically technology. And then we're shown the next clip is, you know, the space station. But the use of technology generally is giving advantage over rivals. Yeah. So, okay, it's just an example of the use of technology, you could say, yeah. So bishop f3, d5, rook e1, bishop f3. If I just hold this second rank for a moment with bishop f3, I'm not entirely pleased with this position. d5, queen d4. So queen d4, queen f6. This looks like queen f6 is a nice way to cause trouble. Queen f6. I have a potential pass pawn in the center, looking structurally for a moment at the expense of my tactical abilities. c5 and d6 could create a nice pass pawn in the center. Queen f6. Queen g6. I could simplify it down. I'm not too convinced. Does this really have teeth? This good situation. The queen's coming off. C5. I don't know if that pass pawn's effective. Maybe I should just keep the queens on. The queen's nice in the centre here. I think a key consideration keeping the queens on is king safety. It is a bit loose. Maybe d6 and then bishop d5. So d6 and bishop d5 as an example. D6 immediately. And if it takes bishop b7, bishop d5 is dangerous. Or play for c6. Because taking there, there's queen c4, bouncing off c6. Okay, I think we're getting into a pass pawn game, which I'm not convinced about. Oh well. b6, so d6 here and then c6. Maybe it was c6 and then d6 and then d6, there's c6. And there's cb there, so maybe d6. So hitting the rook and then c6 and d7 might be interesting. Might be is the operative word, because these could be liabilities, these pawns. They could easily be liabilities. Okay, at the moment, let's just take that off a light square. And there's bishop d5. That could be a pain. If I hold this for a moment. Oh, hold on a sec. Uh-oh, I didn't mean to do that. Oh, okay, I'm on the verge of... I'm getting crushed now. Okay, great. You can just take a pawn. I'm managing to lose all my pawns. Great. Okay, let's just lose this pawn as well. Rook d5, rook e8, it's king f7. Try that. Okay. Yeah. Try and break these pawns up. No, this is far from ideal. Okay, I think he's giving me rook e5 here, potentially. Oh, what? I thought he was going to play... No, okay. Okay, I think this is okay. I think this is a... I thought he was going to give me rook e5. Okay. Okay, here I'm mating. Here I can get another pawn back. This is far from ideal, I've got to say. So he is getting that d7 pawn. Or not. Let's just hold the tension for a moment. Can I just get this with my king? I thought the king would assist. Can I not just get this pawn with my king? Again, and now I am really asking for it again. Okay. Maybe there's this for rook e5. No, that doesn't help. Okay. Okay, rook f5. Yeah, no, this has been bad news game. This game has been... Oh no. Did he just have rook f7 just winning there on the spot? Technically. He did, didn't he? I don't know. This is why I hate thinking about pawn structures. It just wrecks my tactical game quite often, thinking about pawn structures. Okay, thanks. Yeah. All right. It's, yeah, I mean, well played. I mean, yeah, you know. Okay, oops. I feel I need to investigate pawn structures more, and I feel there's going to be an amount of short-term damage that during actual games, I'm be thinking, trying to think more strategically, which is quite often, in conflict with thinking in a more concrete way. The price of trying to think abstractly is paid concretely. I mean, that thing about the pawns looking impressive, clearly they weren't, for very concrete reasons. They were just weak. It really depends on the position. If you've got to really calculate to make sure the visuals can be trusted. So yeah. In bishop g5, there's knight takes f3 and queen takes. Apart from this, have we had this kind of... I've had a torture session with Oops before in this line. Was it a couple of weeks back? Okay. Stop bishop g5. So g5, g4. Knight ge7, knight g6. b5 is another idea. Okay, we've had this kind of thing before. Right, I thought he was doing me a favour with this, but it turned out to be torturous. Yeah, okay, in terms of structure, I think I will do this, because it does look wrecked visually, but tactically also, I'm not entirely convinced about this F-file compensation. So, okay, I'm going to test the structural intuition here. The dynamics, I think the key thing I've keep noticing, right, if you have a player like Karpov or Adams, because Adams I really respect as a positional player, when he wins against a tactical player based on strategic aspects of the pawn structure, he's definitely got a minimized counterplay mindset. Otherwise, he's just going to get checkmated. If he doesn't, he's just going to get checkmated. The person with the isolated queen's pawn is going to have a flurry of activity in the middle game. So there has to be this reduced counterplay mindset. Okay, I've repaired my opponent's pawns, but actually it feels more dynamic to me. So in repairing my opponent's pawns, it feels a little bit more that I've got nice pieces. Yeah, I did that without thinking really. Queen e5, it looks as though it's a nice queen. It might support tactically, h2. So yeah, it's healing, but there's still, it doesn't look an amazing structure for the pieces. Here, for the white pieces. Okay, so queen e5 hits f5 anyway, as well immediately. As long as there's no entry point rook d7, and then there's like knight g4. It looks pretty nasty. If the queen was over here, that looks really nasty. So queen e5, I'm hitting f5, and there might be like knight g4 coming. Okay, so I think this is weakening the king. Yeah, I mean sometimes repairing the opponent's pawn structure, and there has actually been, talking of Lasker versus Capablanca, there's a classic game. Lasker beat Capablanca and exchanged royal pairs, and I looked at that yesterday actually. Yeah, I've been looking at a lot of historical games recently. And it occurred to me that, the undoubling of the pawns in that example game, this classic royal pairs exchange, made more exploitable weaknesses, basically. White entrenched the knight soon after on e6. Yeah. Now, rook e4, knight f2 is check, right? So, can I afford to do this? Or is there queen h4? But then there's queen f5. Okay, I hope I can afford to do this. So I'm threatening mate. If queen h4, queen f5. All right. Now I'm getting a pass pawn. Am I being silly with the pass pawns again here? Is this a mirage? This pass pawn? Okay, maybe rook e7, king h7. Okay. Knight d5, or knight e4. Maybe knight d5 or knight e4. Okay. Yes, very decisive. Okay. So, you know, I'm not really convinced by this position. Yeah, my e pawn is about to be rounded up, isn't it? Yes. Okay. It's another terrible pawn decision, it seems, on the way. Can I at least try for knight d5? So without c4. Plays b3. And I play b4, trying to fix down the pawns to stop c4. Okay, can I try and put brakes on here? Okay, knight d4, knight c6, there's e2. There is a point to having that tactically. So I don't think you can go on an adventure. There is... okay, there is knight e6, potentially. Alright, have I got g6 here? Try and dismantle these pawns. Well, now there's e2, as mentioned before, isn't there? As long as there's no rook e3, I've got knight e3. There's no rook e3 because there's a knight on e3. So knight takes. There's no. Yeah, that knight adventure. Surely I'm punishing it here. Mind you, it's not that convincing, is it? He's got rook and knight. Yes. No, it's not that convincing at all. Am I going to get mated with rook and knight here? I'm going to get mated with rook and knight. There's f5, sealing and mating that. Okay, queen g2. Alright, queen g4. Can I get away with queen g4? I don't really, okay, check here. Alright, okay. Yeah, I feel very tactically weak this morning. My own excuse is, sorry, I've been looking at pawn structures, so please excuse why I'm so weak and inept in this session. I've explained it. I hope I've explained it. Right, thanks. Okay, so Elo Quent, yeah. This happened when I read Nimzovich, My System. I think I had a few years back a really disastrous season where I thought everything was weak in the opponent's pawns. So my tactics were down the drain, and I also had overexcitement about anything theoretically weak. And I started thinking, hang on, surely a weakness, this was an epiphany at the time, a weakness to be a weakness actually has to be exploitable. And when you think about exploitable, you're actually seeing the relationship between pieces and pawns and how also your king doesn't get mated when you try and chase double pawns on the queen side. You don't really want to get mated in that process. So that questions whether those double pawns were actually exploitable or not. So instead of like 5 different weaknesses in the opponent's position, there might only be one which is actually vaguely exploitable. So that realism I had to put back in my game. But there was this season, yeah, post Nimzovich, my system. Why isn't the knight what's going on here? Is it bishop h4? Is that the idea? This is a very tactical position, isn't it? Bishop h4. If I played knight takes d5 though, do I believe this? G takes bishop h4, or knight takes d5 seems a lesser evil move given bishop h4. Yeah, this seems a whole lot less risky. Although even so, you know, he still has bishop h4 on the cards. This is the problem. You'll probably find this if you read pawn structure books or strategy. You will get potentially massacred in the short term, yeah, tactically, because you know, unfortunately, you know, it's, you know, there's pieces and there's king on the board as well. So when you do any sort of abstraction like that, adventure, the benefit is you can have this lens focused on pawn structures. Sure, you can understand them much more easily without distraction because you're not looking at pieces and king, right? But, you know, when you go back, you've got an extra insight into pawns, but you do need to factor back in pieces and king, right? So this idea of being exploitable or not, you know, I think for me, it put me back on planet Earth after reading Nimzovich, my system. But I feel the same right now, doing my own independent investigations of structural examples, that, you know, this lens is at a cost during an actual game anyway, this strategic lens of the pawn formation. I mean, here it looks wrecked, right? But, you know, it's, so what, you know. Maybe the bigger consideration, well, it appears to be a piece down as well, though. Okay, so c6, but my king is stuck there, so I just can't. If I can't see a clear winning plan, then it's still a fight. So, okay, so c6 or rook g6, maybe rook g6. Where's this bishop going? Okay. Oh, can I try and trap this bishop with king g8? What's going on here? King g8? Alright, so can I break up these pawns? No. I hope you guys have seen that Queen's Gambit on Netflix. I'm going to watch it again. I think it's beautiful. It's beautifully done, and it's got rave reviews in multiple countries. Queen's Gambit is a must-view on Netflix if you haven't seen it already. And she was interviewed about it. She also liked the fact that it's a reminder that you might feel alone, but there is a lot of support there. And, you know, so she was really happy to get all that support in the end, in that critical match in the end. Kasparov apparently was involved in the final position stuff as a consultant. It's really quite good. Bishop c4 is coming. What about b5, just to extinguish the flames a bit? Or is there d5? This is the thing, tactical considerations. Queen a2, queen f2, there's rook d2. And, okay, queen d5 hits the rook on h1. Then there would be bishop e6. You see, I'm preferring queen d5, bishop e6 to b5 because, you know, there's a tactic, d5 potentially, rupturing things, although it might not be that dangerous. But queen d5 and bishop e6 seems altogether better or not. No, bishop c4. Maybe back to b5. b5. Okay. b5. Okay, let's not run out of time. Like this G file, if I can test the G file. E4, knight D4. Okay, is there rook G2, queen A2? There's always rook D2 on queen A2. Queen A2, rook D2. F6. Trying to undermine with F6. Oh, this is getting a bit strange. Okay, I don't want to be short on time for this. Actually, I had a thought. Why didn't I play queen c4? That was an opportunity or weakness of the last move. That's sort of grand strategy. Just weaknesses of the last move are really important. If I just play queen c4 here. I'm going to keep a blockade, otherwise these pawns are actually pretty dangerous. This is an amazing pawn structure. Really, it's something to behold. I'm going to try and dismantle it. Let's take out these pawns as priority to the rook, actually. Yeah, I don't want these two connected pass pawns being thrown at me. Knight e6. About stalemate here. Yeah, I thought it was about a stalemate then. That's always a risk. Okay. Yeah. Oh man. That was that was very. That was a really high architecture pawn chain there. White had in that game. Heavy architecture pawn chain. A6 and knight d4. example, queen d7, if I castle queenside, so king b8, d5, what about just knight d4? He's neglected c2, knight d4. What does he do about knight c2? There's no queen d1 anymore. I should have played knight d4. If c3, maybe d5. d3s might be weak. So I think this is comfortable, basically. But, yeah, I think it's comfortable. Rook e8, d5. Is this d5 any good? It's not really. I'm not sure it's doing anything. What if I just double here for a moment? d5 any good? Okay. Well, I'd like to play f6 to kick this knight away. I think d5. Undoubling the pawns. I could, in one case, get g4. In another, it looks at like, maybe late at c5, c4. I hate thinking about pawns now. I'm worried about thinking about pawns. But there could be a potential pass pawn in the center. Okay, there's f6 break here, potentially. f6, f6. Okay, so f6. Right, yes, interesting. Queen c6, though. No, knight f7, rook takes, it's queening. So knight f7, essentially, I think I have to play rook takes e6. But also, queen c2, okay, there's rook f2. I think knight f7, rook e6. Let's check this again. Knight f7, a rook takes, pawn takes. It's just queening. It takes my knight. Queening. Oh, queen f2, there's rook e2. Queen d2, there's rook f2. Here I think rook e2 is interesting anyway. For queen c2. Right, there's rook c1 for queen b6 potentially. But in the meantime, I think f2 needs to be parried. There's queen d3. Maybe queen d3. Actually, there's queen f3 after. If there's queen f3, there's a Witten g4 square. So there's... Oh, that's interesting. Will I just take this? Was the idea queen? Okay. There's queen f3 for queen g3. That looks dangerous. Okay, there's rook c7. I don't think these checks last too long. Okay, queen d6 is dangerous. Okay, I think I have to run with check for a moment. Okay, I can see that rook e7 is handy, or queen f5, queen d7. Queen f5, queen d7 should be sufficient. I can go for the checkmate, rook e2. It's mating, I'm first the checkmate, I think. Queen f3 or queen f2. Okay, interesting, yeah. Thanks, Goggin. Okay. 3-minute game now. Okay, Mexican defense. Isn't knight e5 dangerous for knight c4? Yeah. This looks strange to me, to allow this. Knight c4, I think I'm being more than pedantic. There's an issue about the dark squares here, surely. So c5 and d4 was crushing. Well, I'm imagining this is knight a5. Is there knight a5? Okay. Well, there's a check here. Aha, okay. It's not over till it's over. Queen f4, trying to get queens off. Because the clock favours me. If I can reduce the dynamics, okay. Just try and reduce the dynamics here. So queen f6, rook c8, knight c3. Well, there's knight c3 winning the exchange. Queen b7 is bishop d5. And bishop f5 coming up. Okay. Can I just keep my pawn structure intact? I'll do a pawn structure consideration. There's nothing on the light square. Hang on. They're at full prophylaxis mode against the bishop already. Yeah? Okay, am I going to be punished for this insolence? I want to keep my pawn structure intact. I'm sorry. I find that funny. Okay. I don't know. I've got a weird sense of humour. Okay. I just want to keep my pawn structure intact. Give me a discovered check. I don't mind. But my pawns, you know, if you're talking about my pawn structure today, I want it intact. All right, thanks, Sydney. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Karthik. Yeah, generally, if the opponent has a bishop of a certain colour, like in that example, it is a tactical shortcut for you to reduce your calculation overheads, just to start sticking things on the other colour of the bishop. It's a bit like driving on, you know, the other side of the road to the bishop, essentially. And your king, you know, can often be placed on the other colour. So, and it's an intuitive prophylactic thing you can do. When the bishop, you know, dark square bishop, or, you know, light square bishop, but my pieces are all on the other colour. It's a kind of a handy trick, I think, especially for blitz, that kind of little trick. But also in endgames, you know, even if you're Magnus Carlsen, if the opponent's got a dark square bishop, you put all your pawns on light squares, even in endgames. Okay, so here we've got this 3-minute game, and yeah, structural damage is going to be happening. That's really unfortunate for the theme of today. Okay, what about knight h4, trying to keep structurally intact, knight c3, queen c3? Or is it just a pointless waste of time, all of this? I don't know. It is an opportunity afforded because he hasn't played h6. He can't put the bishop back on h7, knight c3, queen c3, protect c2. Okay, he's got that semi-open c-file. That's pretty nasty. Rook c8, queen d2. Okay, once I take out this light square bishop, I feel I should have stuff happening on the light squares in general. I think I need to keep f2 protected. Okay, that's away from a tempo gain on knight b4. I'm going to play c3. e6 seems like a natural build-up target. c3, stable against knight b4. Double the rooks, queen g5, maybe. There's a tactical idea of rook e6, bishop d5 emerging. There's another idea, queen f4, g5. That closes up things. Okay. So king g2. Right. So I think there has been some light square compromises. Can I play for h4 as a break here to break up these pawns? Mind you, it just takes and then g5 potentially. At the moment, it's not exactly convincing. Right. Okay, there's a battery situation I've just noticed. Bishop going here. So f3, bishop c2, queen d3. All right, d5 is being compromised, but there is dynamic stuff. Okay, I think I have to take then f3. That's not that pleasant, is it? Oh, there's knight c4 to e3. Oh, that's not that nice. That's not nice. Am I getting positionally crushed here out of interest? It seems that way. That's a good point. Oh. Okay, pre-move timer emerging. I'm just giving up pawns for nothing. Okay, great. Rook g6. I completely got played. Sorry. Positionally murdered in a 3-minute game. Well played. Well played. Oh man. That was terrible. That was so terrible. Okay. Anyway. Moving on swiftly. Okay, we've had this, haven't we? Well, I've had it recently in games where white can't win a pawn because of queen a5 and bishop a6. Okay, what about knight f4 to g6 here? Is that pathetic or is it okay? If I don't want to leave that pawn thing hanging. What about bishop b7? There's also... Yeah, there's a few possibilities. Bishop b7 might be the safer. Just leave the knight on d5 for a moment. Okay, if there's castles, there's queen h4, there's rook a5. There's stuff like this happening. Okay, queen h4 ties down the knight because queen c4. If he wants to create weaknesses, that's fine. If I can castle and maybe f6 later. Castle king h8 f6. Oh, lovely weaknesses. Lovely, lovely, lovely. My bishop likes the queen on g2, potentially. So c5 for knight f4. Am I being totally optimistic here? He's got knight e4 coming up. Caution. If I played c5 here, on c4 I could play knight b4. It might be worth doing anyway. On c4, okay. Okay. There's queen g2 for knight e3 potentially. On knight f3, there's knight e3 potentially for bishop e4. Oh no. Did I really just go into a tactic like that? Muppets. Maybe f6. So I'm threatening this. If 96 f6, there's a bit of a liability with the knight. This isn't looking good. There's queen f6 here for rook g2. There's rook g3. Rook g3. Okay, it's a bit of a swindle, this game. Sorry. Yeah, I messed up tactically earlier, but I sensed the light squares are a bit of a red flag to the ball. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I got tactically lucky. You got to be on the ball for these tactics. If I just played king h8, that's it. You got to be on the ball for these tactics. Tactics is as Teichmann says. Tactics. 99% of chess he reckons tactics. Well, for most casual players, yeah, I think for masters maybe 90% plus. It's still a high content percentage tactics. I mean, the faster time controls, again, the percentage goes up. This is why it's always a worry to think about pawn structures, because I just worry about the dilution of calculation. Now, I remember I didn't manage counterplay. There was a game, was it 3 weeks ago? Dangerous Ride beat me at the back of a session when I opened up my king. It all backfired horribly. I want to try and avoid this counterplay situation, nightmare that happens. I'm going to be a bit more careful, I hope, here. King h2, knight d5, c3, d4, maybe a plan which doesn't involve opening up my king necessarily, especially when the opponent only has 10 seconds left. I don't need to open up my king as a general rule. That would be the ideal. So knight d5, c3, d4. Knight d5, c3, d4. Right, so knight takes knight e2, c3, d4. Actually, the lens I'm talking about isn't even the dilution of a tactical lens. It's more about, for me, I'm not even looking at variations as such. I just try and celebrate downsides. So any expense at celebrating downsides, and that could be missing g2 downside celebration. The combinations or tactics is just a servant of that. So if I'm diluting thinking about pawn structure, that is the concern. The real concern is that, not that I'm calculating like a machine all the time. It's just that I want to be able to notice slight issues in the position. And it could be, celebrating those issues either tactically or positionally. But I just want to be on the lookout for tiny issues. So if you sort of trade that off with looking at pawn structure, I think it's nice to sort of know as much about pawn structures before an actual game as possible. So I do think it's all really valuable. If Soltis's thing, pawn power with command, it's all really valuable stuff. And even Wiki's got a basic template of what to do in certain pawn structures, a summary. I don't know if you guys have checked that out, if you look at Wiki pawn structures. But yeah, I think during the games, during a concrete game, it's good to be alert on any tiny little, downsides of the opponent's position. And if you see, the thing is, it's okay to be a good calculator, but if you don't know a combination is there in the first place, then it becomes a bit pointless. Okay, I am opening up my king here. Is there knight g4 for hg, queen h4? I'm going to work out knight g4 here. hg. Oh, do I? I guess I have to. Hang on. Haven't I got king g3 in the worst case scenario? Okay, hg, queen h4, bishop h3, bishop g4. Yeah, that is nasty. Could I not just play... Oh man, this is too much like hard work now. Like, what about king g3? I'm just looking at this again. King g3. Okay, I'm going to assume king g3 here. Okay, it wasn't even played anyway. Now here, knight g4, hg. Is that a different scenario? It is, isn't it? Queen h4, bishop. I'm controlling g4. It's a different scenario. Bishop h3, I'm controlling g4 there. Check, bishop h3, there's no bishop g4. See, I like capturing towards the center in general, not isolating pawns. Which is why I'm even trying to push for this g takes f. Can I play for e5 for a bit squishy? e5 is a bit squishy, isn't it? Squashy. Squishy, squashy. e5. d5 and e5 or e5? Maybe e5. Oh, I'm not really sure. Oh, b3. Maybe I just keep this kind of potential tension going a little bit longer. If he plays d5, e5, it's more comfortable than playing e5 myself in a way. If he commits to d5, a pawn on d5, it's more comfortable. If I play e5, I feel I'm leaving some weaknesses behind. I should build up these pieces behind this. I was looking at Simple Chess a few days back by Steen, and he talks about the notion of a space advantage, which is really in an interesting way about capacity. You need to be within the capacity of your pieces, so you could have a lot of space, but you also need a lot of pieces to be able to handle that capacity. So your pieces, if they're overextended, it's like they're under capacity. And that's why you get sort of general ideas that if you're cramped, often if you exchange off pieces, it's a good counter strategy for cramped situations, because you want to make your opponent kind of under capacity to handle the space that they've got. So this notion of overcapacity and undercapacity is really interesting. It's in Steen's Simple Chess. So I reviewed it, a few days back. And also, to be honest, he enlightened me about the dark square weakness campaigns I've been playing. That essentially, there's two ways to skin that cat, so to speak. You can either exchange off a guardian bishop, or if you've already got a trump card bishop where the opponent might have, you might have a light square bishop, the opponent doesn't have a light square bishop. So if you encourage the pawns on the other colour, that's another way of reaching the same kind of situation where you've weakened certain squares. So here, e5, my queen is on an x-ray here. This is a tactical consideration. My queen's on an x-ray here. If I played e5, am I going to get stuffed because of tactics to do with the d8 rook? Is queen c3 possible just to get out of the x-ray? And if I play d5, am I actually conceding? I'm squashing that bishop. What about just d5? d5. Just squash this c7 bishop out of things. Bishop c3 also worries me in a tactical sense, weakening f4. But on the other hand, if I've just squished that bishop, f4 shouldn't be such an issue. This kind of weakness of the last move, it shouldn't be such an issue. Should it be bishop c3 and e5? Seems a bit as though I'm going to do some squishing soon. But hang on, knight g4 is around the corner for queen h4 all the time. Yeah, I can't have everything in the position. Maybe just king g1 on knight g4. I don't always have to accept the knight sack. King g1. Alright, so if I build up for e5 to be e5 without regret, e5 without regret is basically building up for that strategic pawn break for the optimal piece placement before e5 is actually played. There should be minimizing regret on that irreversible, otherwise irreversible decision of playing e5. Okay, if I slightly improve the king, and now squish time, d6. I'm hoping this isn't going to be a repeat of 3 weeks ago or something where I got mated. That was not very funny at all. Yeah, that was not very funny at all. I tried to learn a lesson. Okay, h3 is now vulnerable. He is creeping to my king here. Okay, not on this occasion. You see that 18-1? This is that game. I remember that game, yeah. I remember that game. Okay. Have you guys read Simple Chess? You can do it in 2 days. If you've got a few hours each day, you can do it in 2 days, or even 1 day. Simple Chess by Steen. He looks at the elements of basic pawn structures like open files, semi-open files. It's well worth a read. Simple Chess by Steen. I don't know if anyone has read that here. So Steen helped Victor Korchnoi. Steen, along with Raymond Keane, helped Victor Korchnoi in those World Championship matches against Karpov. Steen was one of the original British grandmasters. So he wrote this quite simple book, it seems, Simple Chess. But the beauty of it is you can just read it in like a day or two to increase your basic positional understanding. Because what he's talking about is actually features of pawn structure. It's not like this hard work looking at 17 different structures. It's actually, in a way, more powerful. Because if you think about it, if you're looking at a feature of a pawn structure, like a backward pawn, that exists in multiple different pawn configurations. So it's good to know about backward pawns, isolated pawns, piece outposts. It will apply to a ton of different pawn configurations. So it's a very, very high cost benefit book. So if you always wondered why it's been recommended, it's just like a very quick, high cost benefit way into the fundamental features of a whole load of different pawn structures. You might think, well, what's the point of that? You see, the thing is, if you've got your pet openings, they have these pawn structures, and the better you are at the underlying undertone plans, that could help you tactically even, as well as strategically. So I think Simple Chess is to be recommended by Steen. Stean. Simple Chess by Michael Steen. Does anyone know that book? So we're talking about elements of pawn chains, yeah? Elements. In a way, it's far more powerful. I mean, the isolated pawn might be represented in specifically two different pawn chains, Isolani, E-pawn, D-pawn, according to whatever. But, you know, you can just study isolated pawns in their own right. C4, which I'm doing at the moment. So yeah, I kind of revised Steen, yeah, because I'm trying to beef up my strategic play. Don't laugh. I'm trying to beef up my strategic play. Yeah, I stopped laughing there. You don't have to be Piers Vidler to think about pawn structure. You don't have to be a super GM. I think it's good at most levels below 2200. It's good to be good tactically, though, above all else. Just tactically above all else. I still think that is true. But if you want to dip your toe into strategic play, Steen's Simple Chess, yeah. I'm going to get mated on G2 here. That would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? So I'm pinned up here. What about knight d4? He's got e3, e3, f takes, f takes. I'm defending. Hold on. G2. Yes, I've got an x-ray defense here. Okay. Can I blockade on e3? Blockade, deblockade, as Nimzowitsch says, deblockade. Knight e3. The blockade of that pawn. H3. What am I doing here now? So structurally, it's fascinating. But for a moment, let me just think H3 to prevent knight G4, because I like my blockading knight. Structurally, a plan of B4 and C5 is a long-term plan to sort of dent D6. I want to say sort of dent or isolate D6. But getting to that situation is a long way off. In the meantime, this position appears passive. Can I just tie down, make sure that D5 isn't happening for a start? If Queen E4, C5, that's a backward pawn observation. Queen D4. If you check out the reviews on Amazon, you'll see it gets good reviews as well. It's been around for many, many years, this book, Simple Chess by Steen. You can read it in just a day or two. If you've just got a few hours, you might get some insights you didn't think about before. So, check. Okay, so this knight f4, this imminent knight f4. If I played knight d5, would that be terrible? It probably would be, because he could take with the bishop and then arrange later knight to come into c5. Might actually be bad. I think I want to play for b4, c5. I think strategically about this. b4, c5. Okay, backward pawn installment. Try and maintain the pin. Can I do this? So bishop a2, b4. Or am I putting the bishop away for good here? It's never going to see the light of day. What about putting on g2? Hang on a sec. On f1. Bishop d1 to e2 to f1. He's going to slip in d5 while I do that. If I move away, he's going to play d5. Maybe the bishop's well posted on on b3 to prevent d5. So this is a really confusing position strategically and tactically, because I've got to take care of f2 and d5. Tactical liability, potential liberation, which would lead to tactical liabilities. Let's kick this knight back here. Alright, so if I just take that knight off, there's no knight f4. The bishop's blocked in by its own pawn. Now I'll start working on the backward pawn without worrying about being mated immediately. Any rook d6. There's also queen d1. There's knight d1 as well. There's an extra on the d1 if I play rook d6, but it doesn't matter. I think if you want to slay a tactician as a positional player, you have to like minimize counterplay in the process, otherwise you end up getting mated or horrible things happen tactically. Okay, so c takes here. Why not c takes here? I'm going to find out. Is that d6? Is that d6? Is that any use d6? All right, so tactics, huh? It's that old story. Tactics. He's trying to form me. How dare he try and form me? Is there knight g4 here for knight f6? I think I will. Oh, crikey. He's going to win on time. Or, or stuff like that's going to happen. Okay. Queen e5. This is getting dangerous. Nope. Queen f6. Right, I've got a knight covering g2. No panic, but I'm about to lose on time. How do I manage the counterplay? King h2, rook g1. Rook g3. Quickly double up rooks before losing on time. Rook g3. I was getting quite worried there. I must admit, I was getting really quite worried. I usually get mated in the last game. It's really horrible, but I have this bad habit of being mated in the last game of these sessions. So I've tried to avoid that today. Just about. I was asking for it, wasn't I? Okay. All right. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks. All right. Have a good. Remember to read Simple Chess is your homework assignment. Simple Chess. Okay. See you next week then. Have a good weekend. Thanks very much. Okay.